We're going to start off the day by discussing Colorado's win over North Dakota State last night. This was, even though, yes, it's playing an FCS team, a very talented FCS team in North Dakota State, and a very crucial spot here for Colorado, given the fact that, obviously, the entire cycle since Deion Sanders has arrived in Colorado, the entire media has either been propping him up on a pedestal or desperately trying to tear him down. It's been a very loud atmosphere out of Colorado, so to see them be able to fend off, again, a very tough, scrappy North Dakota State team was a good sign for Colorado, as their first game as members of the Big 12 Conference goes down as a win. And it would not have been possible without the play of quarterback Sheduer Sanders, where I have been up and down in terms of what I think of him in terms of being a quarterback at the NFL level. But if this is the type of play and talent that you are getting from him, I thought that it was overall an excellent performance from him. 26 of 34. He had threw for 445 yards, 4 touchdowns, did have an interception, but came on one of the weirdest bounces you will ever see. It hit the back of an NDSU player's calf or leg and popped straight up into the arms of a defender. That took place in the red zone, so definitely a swing of momentum there, but outside of that, it was a mostly clean game. Now, that being said, Sanders, when you talk about having a clean game, Sanders sort of pushes that line a little bit because he is an improviser and he scrambles around, and I do think there is a little bit of recklessness there that will need to be cleaned up a little bit, and that's on a couple different levels. We saw some throws that he made after scrambling around the pocket, specifically the one in the fourth quarter that he ends up getting rewarded with a defensive pass interference penalty, but at that moment, could have been pretty devastating. Those are just the plays that you want to avoid the risk factor. Now, for whatever it's worth, it does feel like this Colorado offense gives him that extra leeway because of the fact that he really is the engine that goes. We're going to talk about it a little bit later, but the offensive line, even though it's revamped and it's 4 out of 5 of the starters are new this year, it's still not a perfect group, and ultimately they're going to need to take some steps in the right direction in the trenches on the offensive side of the ball, probably on the defensive side of the ball as well. But sticking with this idea of the offense, again, I think Sheduer Sanders, especially on that deep ball, throwing through pressure, I thought that he did an excellent job in this game, and those are the types of throws and the type of arm talent that you want to display if you are going to prove that you are worthy of being a top 10 selection, which is where a lot of people are sort of penciling Sanders in at this point. So, again, I think that this was just about everything you could have asked from him for a season opener perspective, and it helps when you have a guy like Travis Hunter that you are throwing to, who was outstanding on both sides of the ball in this game. Offensively is really where I think that he even took a step forward from last season based off of some of the ball skills that he displayed in this game. 7 receptions, 132 yards, and 3 touchdowns. Now, the athleticism and conditioning, obviously, is what stands out about him. But again, when you talk about what is he going to project to be at the next level, what was especially impressive from him was obviously that 3rd touchdown catch that he had in the end zone, defender draped all over him. He was somehow, granted, very long wingspan, something that with the athleticism as well, he has the physical frame for it, just able to reach through the defender and end up pulling that down. Was a much needed touchdown at the time, the 3rd of the night for him, and I'm not sure exactly how many snaps he played on defense. I was trying to do some research into it this morning. Yahoo Sports wrote an article that came out this morning that talked about how he had 43 snaps on the defensive side of the ball, but I know that's not the case because ESPN put up a graphic with him at 43 snaps with 7:45 left in the third quarter. I believe it was after his second touchdown, and then he came right back out onto the defensive side of the ball once again. So played the majority of snaps on both sides. Again, an elite athlete that is going to be a lot of fun to watch because the Heisman is very clearly at this point especially a quarterback award, but Travis Hunter has as good of a chance as any position player in recent history to be able to win the award. But that being said, there's also got to be some level of success within the Colorado program this year where that is more of the bigger question mark. But it's not like Travis Hunter is doing it alone offensively. We also saw a huge night from Jimmy Horn Jr., who was just running free the entire night, it felt like. 7 catches, 198 yards, and 1 touchdown for Horn in this game. Again, the speed, and that's where especially we saw a little bit of the difference from being a Power 5 school in the FBS to playing an FCS school is there is just a different level of athleticism, and that's not to take away from North Dakota State in terms of how well they played, but guys like Horn and Travis Hunter were causing problems all night, and this is going to be a very talented wide receiver core moving forward where you have Hunter, you have Horn, but it's not just that as well. LeJohntay Webster is another name to keep an eye on that a lot of people are anticipating that he is going to be a big part of this offense, a transfer from FAU, and somebody who still made somewhat of a presence in this game. I believe it was 5 catches and, a good 50-something yards. But Jimmy Horn and Travis Hunter were really the ones that stood out in this game in particular. But again, it's a pretty decently deep wide receiver core there. But then when you look at the defensive side of the ball, now, of course, give flowers to North Dakota State for coming out and executing on the offensive side of the ball. Their quarterback, Cam Miller, was very impressive in my opinion. 18 of 22, 277 yards, 1 passing touchdown, 81 rush yards, and 2 rushing touchdowns as well. He was very excellent, and I thought that there was definitely a conversation online with fans about them and the 2 quarterback approach, because as much as Cam Miller was shining for them, a handful of times they went to Cole Payton to try and provide a different look. I really didn't love it. I understand that you want to have these different wrinkles to throw in there, and they said from the beginning of the broadcast that Peyton was somebody that you should anticipate seeing at some point. But I also feel like for North Dakota State, you kind of just have to read the situation, and Miller was pretty, I easily feels a little bit disrespectful to Colorado's defense in this game, but I thought he managed the game very, very well. And ultimately, if you're bringing in a run-heavy specialist for short yardage situations like they did with Peyton in the fourth quarter on that final touchdown drive where it's 4th and 1 and you bring him in to run a quarterback power, I'm cool with that. But then why leave him in? Because it was, I believe, the very next play after that you just saw he didn't really have elite pocket presence. He ends up taking a sack that they could just not afford at that point. Now they're ultimately able to overcome that and they end up scoring a touchdown, but taking the sack there hurts in a couple different ways, puts you behind the sticks obviously, but also at that point with the clock being a factor, down 2 scores, you can't afford to take those negative plays that also continue to keep the clock running. So I thought that was a little bit of a misplay from North Dakota State, but overall, their offense had a very fair amount of success against Colorado. 449 total yards of offense, 292 in the passing game, and 157 in the rush game. So ultimately, again, this was a nice showing from North Dakota State, and you have to give them credit. but it does also sort of fall back on Colorado's defense as well, which was a concern for the Buffaloes last season, and doesn't seem to, they added some players for sure to try and make an extra effort and take some steps forward on the defensive side of the ball. They go out, they get some transfers such as Preston Hodge, the cornerback. They get Deion Hayes out of the transfer from Pittsburgh. So they beefed up their defense a little bit and got some extra talent in there, but ultimately still just kind of got driven up and down on for the most part. Each of the first 4 Bison offensive drives resulted in making it to the red zone. They scored on all 4 of those drives. That's something that Colorado is going to need to lock down on if they ever want to take that next step and, ever take that next step. Obviously, I'm more so referring to this season and being able to live up to some of those expectations. Defense is definitely going to need to be better. Now, sort of a double-edged sword here. The fact that North Dakota State was so methodical with them, it led to Colorado's defense being on the field the majority of the game. Add to that the fact that Colorado's offense was moving pretty fast, so North Dakota State dominated the time of possession in the first half. That probably played some amount of a factor, but that's just the way football works sometimes. You got to make stops. You got to end drives. North Dakota State, I believe they were 7 of 13, I think it was, or 7 of 11 on third down conversions. Just can't really have that if you are Colorado. Now, ultimately, rounding this out here, how convincing of a win was this for Deion Sanders and Colorado? Overall, it's hard for me to get extremely excited about beating an FCS team, and as much credit as I am trying to, reinstill and that NDSU deserves, their flowers for the way that they came out and stepped up to the challenge in this game. Did end up covering the spread for whatever it's worth. Colorado was 10.5 point favorites and ultimately results in a 5-point game. I do think that, Colorado, you kind of have to temper your excitement with this game, and if it's something that they continue to build on, that's great, but there were definitely some real red flags. I talked about the defense. Another huge part of this game to me was the lack of a running game. Colorado's offense accounted for 504 yards in this game, and only 59 of them were on the ground. 23 attempts, just 2.6 yards per carry. That has to be better. Dallin Hayden was the lead back in this game, but he was bottled up for the most part. Ultimately, you look at the end of the game as well, a lot of people talking about the play calling decisions for Colorado on that final drive, which is fair because it was pretty much all through the air, and it actually left open a very slight window for North Dakota State to be able to walk this game off. They end up completing the Hail Mary at the end of the game, but stuffed a few yards short. But that was only possible because of the fact that Colorado didn't do a great job of killing clock. And Deion talked about it after the game, talking about, the way you run out clock is getting first downs, and that's what we aim to do. But ultimately, it was a third down throw that was pretty reckless from Sheduer Sanders that I thought that the Buffaloes kind of lucked out a little bit with the defensive pass interference. Maybe I'm being overly critical. I thought the defender did a pretty good job of trying to turn his head around. But, either way, they get the first down off of a pass interference call. And even then, they don't trust their run game to run the clock out. And that's something that's going to need to be better because you have to be able to run the football if you are consistently going to be able to close out games. And that's not what we saw from this Colorado offense last night at any point. And again, I thought it was pretty indicative. You can absolutely get on the coaches for the play calling there on that final drive. I will 100% hear you out. I do think that they deserve some blame there, but I feel like if you look a little bit behind the scenes there, it's probably a bigger statement on they don't have confidence in that run game. And that's again, Sheduer Sanders is excellent. You have a deep wide receiver room with tons of talent that you're going to be able to mix and match sort of who the number one target is. Probably, I mean, it's going to be Hunter for the most part. But again, I do think that with the other options that they have in there with Horn and Webster, that they should be able to throw the ball all day long, and that's fine. But at some point, the situation calls for running. Is Colorado ever going to be able to take that step and make a development in that asset? But let me know what your thoughts on this game are. Again, week 1 win against an FCS team at home. There's only so much you can take out of it, and yet it was a massively entertaining game. I feel like we learned a little bit more about the identity of this Colorado team. Again, just going to be very interesting to see how they build off of this. But Colorado, of course, was not the only game from last night. We had 4 other ranked teams taking place. So we're going to be diving into all of the other action from Thursday night in college football. But before we do so, we are going to take a quick break. Do not go anywhere, and we will be right back.